Astros wiped the sweat from his forehead with his velvet sleeve and took the dark stone stairs 2 at a time. He reached the heavy double doors of the Empress's wing, grabbed the iron handles, and pulled them open. A picture of a silent, seemingly extinct grand hall opened before him. There were no royal guards, no bustling maids, just a gloomy, cavernous space draped in absolute silence. Astros swallowed hard. He began to slowly creep up the grand staircase, stepping lightly on the marble. He didn't understand why he felt the overwhelming need to sneak. But just like the last time he had visited Senevier's territory, the palace felt less like a royal residence and more like an opulent crypt. The eerie, suffocating atmosphere made his skin crawl. Glancing nervously at the heavily curtained windows, Astros took the remaining steps at a jog, reaching the third-floor corridor. Finally, the grand mahogany door to his sister's private quarters came into view. Holding his breath, the young prince stopped in front of the door and knocked carefully. A long minute passed. There was no answer. No one asked who had come, and no one told him to enter. Is she really sleeping? He wondered. Astros pressed his ear to the heavy wood, then knocked a little harder. A dull, wet thud echoed from inside, like something heavy hitting the floor. Astros hesitated, his heart pounding against his ribs. He slowly pressed down on the brass handle, pushed the door ajar, and peeked inside. A thick, cloudy layer of sweet-smelling smoke billowed out of the bedroom, stinging his eyes. Choking slightly on the stale air, Astros stepped inside. His eyes widened in absolute shock. The luxurious bedroom looked as though it had been struck by a localized hurricane. Astros blinked, staring at the devastation. Moving as if hypnotized, he stepped further into the chaos. Shards of shattered crystal goblets were scattered across the floorboards. The priceless woven carpet smelled heavily of spilled red wine. The room looked like it had snowed, ripped silk and thousands of white goose feathers from shredded pillows blanketed the furniture. As he blankly surveyed the destruction, Astros suddenly caught his own reflection and winced. A massive, full-length dressing mirror had been violently smashed. The intricate web of cracks reflected dozens of fragmented, distorted pieces of his own terrified face. A profound, sickening sense of wrongness washed over him. He began to slowly back away toward the door. But then, something rustled in the feathers behind him. Astros turned around abruptly and froze. Talia was lying on the floor in the center of the room. She was wearing a thin, translucent nightgown, her limbs carelessly spread out across the ruined carpet. Astros stopped breathing. She was staring blankly at the vaulted ceiling. Her face was so pale and gaunt that not a single drop of life seemed to remain in her. She looked exactly like a beautiful, discarded corpse. A cold chill violently raced down the boy's spine. Slowly, like a mechanical doll, Talia reached out a hand as thin as a birch branch. She grabbed a handful of feathers from the floor and tossed them weakly into the air. The white feathers swirled down over her face like snow. Still staring into the empty air above her, Talia slowly shifted her unfocused, bloodshot eyes toward the door. Astros instinctively took a step back. Talia parted her cracked lips. "Have you come to take a look?" she asked, her voice a hoarse, rattling whisper. I just wanted to visit you." Astros stammered, his voice trembling. Her dead, empty gaze drifted down to the lush, vibrant bouquet of lilies he was clutching to his chest. Astros felt his ears burn with intense shame. For some reason, standing in this ruined room, holding bright, cheerful flowers felt like a profound, unforgivable insult. Talia closed her eyes, looking unbearably exhausted. "Put them down and leave." Astros stood frozen for a second, then quickly walked over and placed the bouquet on a small, unbroken side table. He didn't know what else to do or say. Looking helplessly at his broken sister one last time, the boy turned and fled. Barons was waiting for him at the end of the corridor. Seeing the prince's deathly pale, terrified face, Barons frowned deeply, his hand dropping to his sword hilt. "Your Highness? Were you harmed?" Astros didn't explain anything. He just grabbed the knight's armored hand. "Let's go back to my palace." Astros practically sprinted down the silent, grave-like corridor. He didn't even know what he was running away from. He just knew he had to escape this cold, agonizing place as quickly as possible. Before he rounded the corner, he looked back once. The door to the bedroom was still slightly ajar, leaking white smoke into the dark hall. It felt like a colony of fire ants was crawling through her veins. The phantom pain, like 1,000 red-hot needles, traveled up her shins, digging viciously into her crushed knee, her hips, and her lower back. It wasn't the blinding, screaming agony of the initial break, but it was an incredibly deep, maddening itch. Sitting on the floor, Talia frantically dug her fingernails into the thick, uneven scar tissue covering her knee. It felt as though the parasites crawling under her skin had gone completely berserk, biting directly into the marrow of her bones. Desperate to dig the disgusting things out, Talia began to violently tear at the thick, keratinized crust of the scars. Fresh, dark blood immediately welled up, pouring from the reopened wounds. But despite the searing, burning pain of the torn flesh, Talia dug her nails in even deeper, her breath coming in ragged, manic gasps. At that exact moment, the heavy oak door was pushed open. The head nanny stepped into the room, carrying a silver tray. Seeing Talia sitting in a pool of feathers and fresh blood, violently tearing her own flesh apart, the nanny let out a piercing shriek. "Stop that immediately!" The nanny practically threw the tray onto a table and rushed forward, grabbing Talia's bloody wrists. Talia stared at the woman with a lifeless, dead gaze. "Why are you doing this?" the nanny cried out in genuine despair, struggling to hold Talia's hands away from her legs. "The scar is already unspeakably ugly, but you are only making it worse. What will you do if it gets infected and rots?" Talia stopped struggling. She looked at the woman in total silence. This was the exact same woman who had spent the last 10 years brushing Talia's hair, constantly cooing about how breathtakingly beautiful she was, how she was the spitting image of Empress. She was the one who had always looked at Talia with fawning, trembling awe. And now, looking closely into the nanny's eyes, Talia saw exactly what Senevier had promised. There was no awe left. There was only profound pity, laced heavily with disgust. Talia had become a repulsive chore. Gritting her teeth, Talia violently ripped her wrists from the nanny's grip and shoved the older woman in the shoulder. "Get out!" Talia screamed, her voice cracking. "It makes me sick to look at you. Get out!" Looking down at her sternly, her patience entirely evaporated, the nanny huffed in deep annoyance. She walked over to the silver tray, picked up a bowl of porridge and a vial of medicine, and shoved them roughly into Talia's hands. "Eat this, and I will leave. I won't touch you anymore." Talia raised her arm, fully intending to hurl the heavy ceramic bowl directly at the woman's head. But apparently, even the clumsy nanny had learned from the previous day's tantrums. The woman quickly stepped out of throwing range and glared sternly at the princess. "If you do not eat the food, I will not light the sleeping incense," the nanny threatened coldly. "You can sit here and suffer." With a hateful, murderous glare, Talia slowly lowered her arm. She had absolutely no strength left to argue. She was a slave to the smoke. Her hand trembling violently, Talia scooped up the sticky, green medicinal sludge and shoved it into her mouth. It tasted like ash and dirt. Overcoming the violent urge to vomit, she forced the porridge down and washed it away with the bitter liquid medicine. True to her word, the nanny walked over to the bronze brazier, threw in a fresh handful of mandrake and glacier moss, and struck the ignition crystal. Talia took a deep, desperate breath of the acrid smoke and collapsed backward onto the carpet. The heavy, narcotic stupor rapidly overcame her, instantly dulling the phantom ants biting at her bones. Feeling the sweet, heavy relaxation spreading through her limbs, Talia turned her glassy eyes toward the window. Beyond the sheer curtains, the sky was bleeding a brilliant, violent red as the sun set. Soon, the thick, sticky darkness of the night would cover the palace. Even in her semi-conscious, heavily drugged state, a primal fear constricted her throat. She was terrified of the nightfall. The darkness instantly choked her with the memory of the freezing ravine, lying crushed beneath the rocks, waiting endlessly for salvation. But the dawn was even more frightening. The dawn meant she had to wake up and live another day trapped in this mutilated, hideous body. Closing her eyes as the drugs dragged her under, Talia whispered a desperate, pathetic prayer into the smoke. Please, gods. Let all the time allotted to my life burn away in an instant while I sleep. Let me be free from this pain forever. But, as always, her prayers went entirely unanswered. When she was abruptly awakened by the sensation of a cold hand touching her shoulder, Talia opened her eyes to see the bright, glaring light of morning flooding through the window. A heavy, exhausted sigh escaped her lips. It looks like another damn day has begun. She grabbed her throbbing forehead, preparing to demand the nanny light the brazier again. It is time for you to rise, Your Highness. The voice was completely unfamiliar. It was sharp, cold, and rigidly professional. Startled, Talia rolled onto her side and looked up. A tall, powerfully built woman with eyes the color of polished steel was standing perfectly straight beside her bed. She wore the immaculate, severe black uniform of the Empress's inner circle. The woman offered a flawlessly executed, elegant bow. Forgive me for the insolence of entering your chambers unannounced, Your Highness, the woman said clearly. My name is Talia Roem. I am the senior lady-in-waiting to Her Imperial Majesty the Empress. By Her Majesty's direct command, I will be serving you today. Talia pushed herself up onto her elbows, looking around in profound confusion. The bedroom, which had been a chaotic disaster zone just hours before, was now immaculately, perfectly clean. Not a single feather or shard of glass remained. Even more shocking, a dozen junior maids wearing the crest of the Empress's palace were lined up with military precision against the far wall. Each maid was holding an armful of exquisite silk gowns, corsets, and heavy jewelry. Talia froze at the sight. Her throat tightened with a dark, suffocating foreboding. She remembered Senevier's twisted smile. I have a plan for you. Serve me? Talia asked, her voice trembling slightly. Why are you here? What is happening? Talia Roem looked down at her with cold, uncompromising steel eyes. Today, you have an official audience with His Imperial Majesty the Emperor.